I'm Harvey Goldberg. I'm the music broadcast mixer for the show, which means that all music on the show, whether it be the house band or the guest band, comes through this room, and this is the mix that goes out over the television of the music. From a very young age, music spoke to me. And probably the big bang for me, and again, because of my age, the big bang for me was seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and I was maybe 10 or 11 at that time. And seeing that, I thought, I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, I want to be a part of this. And this is where it led me.
You're in a very unique perspective here, probably one of the only person to have an experience of being inspired to go down this path by the Beatles in this theater, and now you're mixing it.
And to have Paul McCartney sit next to me, doing a playback for him of a performance he did on Letterman and a concert he did from the Marquee.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was full circle. But, you know, as a teenager, I just lived and breathed music. I mean, I was one of those kids that would use my lunch money to buy records. I started working in a recording studio when I was 17 here in New York City. And I just realized if I was going to find out the answer to that question, that's where I was going to find it. Before I was mixing music for television, I was a record mixer. I started with Letterman in the 90s and was with him all the way till the end. And then, fortunately, they asked me to stay on for Colbert. And we're in our 11th season of Colbert now. Letterman's original show, which was over at NBC, which was a much smaller studio. And when a music guest would come on, it wouldn't be with their entire band. It might be one of their players, and they would perform with Paul Schaefer's house band. When Letterman moved over to the Ed Sullivan Theater, they had a full stage, and they were able to allow acts to bring their own bands. They really wanted to take the aesthetic of people that had mixed records rather than people who had come from a television audio background. This is the third solid-state Logic console we've had in this room, and I go back a long way with them. I came out of the record business, and it was really pretty much the premier mixing console for records. Certainly, I would say starting from the late 70s all through the 80s and continuing now to this day. I put everything on VCA masters so that everything could be with me in the middle. So I'm basically always mixing from the middle. So what you're looking at now is a layout of the house band. And you can see that I have a master group of the drums, I have the bass, I have a master VCA of the percussion, I have a master VCA of the guitars, of the keys, of the horns, the background vocals, and our band leader's vocal. Now, the thing is if I want to make individual adjustments on the drums, it's very simple. If I hit this button, all the drums show up here, and I can quickly do an internal balance of the drums. Same thing with the keys. You know, I've got the keys here. If I hit this, all the keyboards show up here. You can see there's 4 different keyboards. I have a left-right synth, a second left-right synth, a Wurlitzer, and a mono Moog. You can see I can move them up and down from here. So I'm basically doing all the mixing from the center.
Now, is Pro Tools recording straight clean off of the inputs?
Yes.
And
the processing is not going to Pro Tools. I do very little processing in the box. The only processing I would do in the box would be pitch correction.
Okay.
I either use the compressors and EQs in the console, or the compressors, the limiters or compressors I have outboard, and all of the effects, whether it be, all the reverbs, that kind of thing, are all outboard. Pro Tools for me is really a tape recorder, period. I like capturing what we did at the time and then adjust it from there. During the show, I write the live mix to automation. I'm old school in that I believe that there's a feel that happens at the time of the show that's hard to recapture. And anybody who's ever worked in a studio will tell you of how many times somebody said, but the rough mix felt better. So I print the live, what they did at the time of the performance. I automate that mix. That mix is written to automation. And the purpose of that is that if they come down and they go, it's so good, I just wish there was a little more reverb on my vocal. We don't have to rethink the whole mix. We just add a little more reverb and we're done.
Are there any kind of advice you'd give to an artist or a band as far as specific preparation that might be unique to this circumstance?
Well, I always listen to the record first, because not that, it's going to be different from the record, but it gives me an idea of what it should feel like. And if there was any kind of special effect that was happening on the vocal, or what kind of reverbs they were using on the drum. I like to hear what their vision of it was for the record. So if I'll hear a specific effect on the vocal, whether it be reverb or slap or a harmonizer or whatever, I'll have that ready to go, because they may want to be very literal to what the record was regarding that, in spite of the fact that it's still going to be different as a live performance. So that's the homework that I do prior to it, is learning what they're going to be doing. And then I have to react to how it really is happening, as opposed to the way they did it in the studio. And one of the things that's interesting about live is that there's an X factor that happens when somebody performs before an audience that supersedes fidelity. And I think, and in hindsight, I think one of the reasons why so many people in the studio, including myself when I was there, obsess about the perfect sound of something, is actually making up for the fact that the X factor is missing. And the X factor is a certain energy, excitement that happens when somebody's performing live and in front of an audience. And that brings a lot to the party that you have to respect and stay out of the way of. And had I been aware of that in the studio, I would have chased for that X factor more than I would have chased for the perfect position of a microphone. It's a fine balance between fidelity and exciting. And I try to find where it qualifies as fidelity, but not at the expense of sounding exciting. And the other trick is trying to get it to sound exciting at a low volume. Hi-fi can be a little boring, because it's high fidelity would be 100% natural sounding, and so that can be a little bit boring. And that excitement is interpretive.
Well, what kind of mixes get you excited?
It's a feel thing. I can't really put it into words. It's a feel thing. If I had to put it in words, it makes me move to the groove. It moves me by the emotion of how the person is singing. It makes me appreciate the beauty of the arrangement. In the morning, we do a setup of whoever the guest band is. Then we do a check to make sure everything got plugged in properly. Then we do a check to listening to each instrument, and making sure that it's clean. And then we do accommodation, sound check, camera blocking with whoever the guest act is. So that's kind of rehearsal for all parties involved, from cameras to me to front of house. The general rule here is I get 2 run-throughs before the cameras join in. Cameras always want to see it anywhere from 3 to 5 times. So you're talking 5 to 7 run-throughs of a song. It all goes multi-tracked to the Pro Tools. The act might come down after the rehearsal to hear a playback and discuss the mix, or just for themselves to make sure their arrangement is working the way they think it's gonna. Usually the front of house mixer, who tours with the act, comes downstairs, but this is a very different animal than what they're used to dealing with. Front of house is very literal. What's being mixed will only be heard in that room on those speakers. What you see is what you get. I tend to take the same approach that I did in making records, in which I'm mixing literally for a format that I never will actually get to hear myself. Everybody's got a different stereo. Everybody's got, speakers hooked up to their TV, or they don't have speakers hooked up to their TV, or they're listening on an iPhone. So I have to do a mix that's going to work on different formats that I actually don't even get to hear. And the real training for me for that was in the years that I was making records. And I was very fortunate that pretty much out of the gate, I worked on a lot of records that became hits. And when you have a hit record, you get to hear it in a lot of different places. You'll walk into a shoe store and you'll hear it playing in the background. You'll get in the car and turn on the radio and it'll come on the radio. You go over to somebody's house and it's in their record collection. So I was very fortunate in that I got to hear how the mixes would translate elsewhere. And I learned which things to obsess about because you would hear it later, and which things not to obsess about because you don't hear it later. And so obviously I've got a setup that I enjoy listening the way it sounds in here. It's a setup that I like the way it sounds in here, but I'm also mixing for what artists call the third eye, which is something that is imagined out there. Anybody who mixes will tell you that they're constantly learning from the last record they made or mix they did what they should maybe do on the next one. As long as I've been doing this, I'm still trying to get better at it. And with this, I'm trying to get something that if I heard this on TV, would it blow me away? And that's what I'm an inspiration junkie. And I'm constantly looking for something that makes me go, wow.